The title of my presentation is Latinos Vote in 2008, and I want to make sure that you guys understand this is an affirmation that Latinos are actually voting. This is no longer a question mark of whether Latinos will vote, but as Arturo and several other panelists will mention, we already shown that we have voted and we are participating and we are impacting the elections. So this for me is a statement of affirmation. And what I want to do is I want to go through here a brief slides about the information that we've gathered and what we've learned. You know, NDN is a public policy think tank and research organization. And one of the things that I've learned since starting here was, actually I learned from before, but it's just been confirmed to me, is that there are a lot of great organizations. For many years have relied on Naleo's reports and research and information to help me learn about how to proactively work in the Latino community, how to message, how to organize. I remember that I first got my big break in campaigns in 1998, working on United States Senator Harry Reid re-election, and I relied almost exclusively on the Naleo election handbook and how they encourage people to register to vote, how to organize voter mobilization drives, and so forth. And then also working with NCLR subsequently on the information they put out there. But one of the most important things that I have learned is that there is an incredible lack of data that is relevant and current regarding the Latino electorate. And therefore, it makes it difficult for professionals and organizations such as the panelists up here to provide you with the best information. And so I applaud Naleo and Arturo, who've taken an initiative, working with Marcelo and their groups and Latino positions, to issue polls that are specifically just about Latinos that can provide current and relevant data, that he can give you that presentation that's out there. But by the way, you know, other groups and other people haven't seen that great information. And major organizations like the Wall Street Journal and MSNBC and CNN, you know what, they're just not polling enough Latinos to provide us the information that we need that's current and relevant on issues. Many organizations provide a very small sample. And therefore, when we're talking about these issues, it's important to understand the source and the information that we're using. But I digress too much, and so I'm going to go into this presentation. So I'm going to focus primarily on 5 key points that I want you guys to focus on. One, that in fact Hispanics are participating in record turnouts at election cycles, more than tripling the turnout from the 2004 primaries. The Hispanic foreign-born population is increasing, as is the percentage of Hispanics who are speaking in Spanish. You heard that also from Arturo's presentation. A third point leading to that is that Democratic presidential candidates have now set a record spending level on Spanish language advertising. We're seeing that the Republican candidates and parties are also beginning to invest a significant amount of dollars into Spanish language communications, which is a positive thing that both parties are beginning to increase the amount of investments they do to Spanish language. And that we're also seeing that according to these elections in 2008, that despite the gains that President Bush made in 2000 and 2004, that Hispanics this election cycle, at least through the primary, are trending Democratic by 3-to-1 ratio. And then finally, what I want to focus on is that there has been lots of discussion about the strength of each of the candidates and what conventional wisdom is throughout the entire primary. There was this perception that U.S. Senator Barack Obama had a Latino problem, and that in fact Senator John McCain had an advantage among Latino voters, being a senator from Arizona and having significant support in his previous re-election. So we'll talk about the polls and where they have that at that point. So first, record participation by Hispanic voters. There was no primary in the 2004 election. My good friend here will tell you that's good news because that meant the Republicans held the White House. So the only thing we can compare when we're looking at numbers is the Democratic primary for 2004 versus the Democratic primary versus 2008. The other thing also, as was mentioned earlier, is that in 2008 we had a much longer primary. You know, we carried all the way on that. You know, a state like Puerto Rico actually had an impact on the election because it lasted throughout. In 2004, there was very few states that voted. But if you count the states that voted and where Latinos participated in those states, there was slightly less than 1 million Latinos that voted in all of 2004. And you compare that to those same states in 2008, and there's more than 3 million voters that voted. So there was an increase. One of the interesting things that I look at is you look at the state of Texas or a state like California, there was more Latinos that voted in the state of Texas this year in 2008 than nationwide in all of 2004. Same is true for the state of California. Just phenomenal turnout, phenomenal increases. Arturo talked about the fact that one of the major reasons that Senator Clinton was able to stay in the race, according to Senator Obama, were her wins in some of these large states. And these were impressive wins. It wasn't a small number of Latinos that were voting. We're talking about an incredible number of Hispanics participating and making a difference that allowed Senator Clinton to stay in the race. And I know that a lot of you guys are going to tell me, and I've heard before, yeah, Andres, Latinos are voting in larger numbers, but there are more young people voting, there are more women voting, there are more seniors voting, there are more Asians voting, there are more white people voting, there are more African American voting. That is true. I'm not going to disagree with that. But if the increase in participation by all those demographic groups remained constant, then the share of the Latino vote would have also remained constant. And that did not happen. In a record turnout year, when all of these groups came out in record numbers, Latinos still increased their share of the vote from 2004, where they were at 9%, to 15% in 2008. That's a 66% increase. So they were breaking records in a record-breaking year. Again, to the affirmation that Latinos are voting in 2008. It's no longer a question mark of will they vote. Something that I got posed to me several times working for the Nevada Democratic Caucus all throughout the year in 2007. Several journalists, several media asked me, yeah, and that's our Hispanics really going to vote. We've heard this story tons of times before. Is it really going to happen? Well, the data is here. It's no longer a question mark. It is now an affirmation. So, going back to this issue of turnout. One of the things that you will see, again, going back to sources, when you saw Arturo's presentation and talking about how the 10 states he put up there and how Latinos performed and the impact they had on the election, he was citing exit polls, same exit polls that we're citing here. When he's talking about turnout, he was citing census numbers. And again, it's difficult to track because they're two different sources. My projection numbers here are using exclusively exit polls. And so if I look at what has happened in all the exit polls, if I go to the same exit poll service and I look at projection line, then I would see that there's a line that's continuing here of about 2.3 million Latino voters that increase each election cycle. That would lead me to say there will probably be about 11.9 million votes that vote in 2008. What's important to remember is that whether I'm using exit polls or whether we're using census numbers, the increase, the percentage increase will be about the same. So I'm projecting that we'll have about a 22% increase in turnout from 04. Using my exit poll numbers, that leads me to 11.9. The 9.2 million figure that Naleo's using is also about a 22% increase. It's about 21 point something. So our increase in participation, what we're projecting, will stay constant. We're both projecting the same percentage of increase. We're just citing different sources. I wouldn't say that one's wrong or one's better. They're just different sources to cite. I'm choosing to use exit polls for my presentation. But again, to me, it's more about we're consistent in the percentage of increase in Hispanic voters that we're looking at. But based upon the exit poll data that I see, that I use, I'm looking at about 11.9 million will participate. So, let's focus on immigrant voters. You've seen some of this before. Historic waves of immigration caused now Hispanics to become the largest minority in the United States. There are now over 45.5 million Latinos living in the United States. One of the interesting statistics that I stole from my friend Marcelo Gallete, our good moderator here, is that right now, according to the census, every 32nd, a Hispanic is added to the U.S. population. And this isn't just by birth. I know this whole myth about Latino lovers, but this is also about immigration, people crossing the border and coming in. So by the end of your presentation, in an hour and a half, you will have, that's 90 minutes, 180 new Hispanics who will be living in the United States. So just keep that in mind. An important thing also that focuses on this issue is that, approximately 15% of the population is Hispanic, and approximately 12% of our population in the United States also speaks Spanish. So if you calculate this math, it would indicate that about 80% of Hispanics actually speak some Spanish or just speak Spanish at home, which is an important thing to keep in mind because as we're communicating, as we're messaging to this constituency, we need to understand what language we should speak in. The other important thing that we've seen is that if you look at the Census Bureau today, a majority of the adult population, those that can register to vote, 18 and over, are foreign-born. They're not native-born, which is also a big misunderstanding in our community. the census charts will show you that there are 16.1 million foreign-born adults and 13.2 million U.S.-born adults. Again, another example of why there's such a high Spanish-speaking rate in our community, because they were born abroad in Latin America, speaking Spanish as their primary language. And I know there's going to be a lot of questions, which is why I always put the bottom point on there about this constituency. We know through our research, and we've been doing this for several years, that every state and every community has a different makeup of Hispanics. So, your particular community may not have a high Spanish-speaking population, but these are numbers just overall as a nation, as a whole. We all know that there's some communities that are predominantly Puerto Rican, some that are heavy Cuban, some that are heavy Mexican, some that are heavy Salvadorian. So each community is different between their native-born and foreign-born population. So I don't want anyone to just take this and say, this is exactly the same for my community. That there are differences, and it's important to understand that, again, as I talk about gathering information to our community. So NDN conducted a poll in after the 2004 election, and we conducted some research as well to figure out how this is trending. And it's important to understand the foreign-born population, because if you look at what's happened since 1988, where there were only 18%, there was a small percent of foreign-born. Moving up to 2004, foreign-born voters made almost half of the total electorate of Latinos that participated. So, what does this mean? We've talked about this before. Candidates are investing record sums of money on Spanish language media. A report that was issued by Johns Hopkins University's Hispanic Voter Project indicated that already at the conclusion of the primary, the Democratic candidates have spent more on Latino advertising, on Spanish language advertising, than has ever been spent before.